years of Singapore under British rule, Singapore relied more on Spice Islands as the hinterland. Later on, Singapore will rely more on Malay Peninsula as the hinterland. So I repeat the definition that we should use for hinterland in this lesson. So in this case, Malay Peninsula shall provide valuable resources like tea and rubber for the economic growth of Singapore.
Wireless chat.
So this change marked the start of closer link between Singapore and the Malay Peninsula.
You can try.
If you recall from the previous lessons, we talked about China, we talked about India, we talked about Spice Islands, but we never say much about Singapore's most immediate neighbours at the north upstairs. Because the link, especially in economic terms, was not that strong yet. If you talk about Malay Peninsula in general, of course, if you talk about Johor per se, it will be quite strong. Then from this point onwards, it would be a turning point for Singapore, and it would be the next leap of prosperity for Singapore. With this new hinterland emerging, things would change. So from the first lesson and the second lesson, it's about first industrial revolution. So first industrial revolution, if you look back and revise, it will be more related to the introduction of steam power and the development of mechanization. Then after about 50 years later, the second industrial revolution would take more center stage. This was the time where you have more development in steel, electricity, oil, etc. With the second industrial revolution, with this development mentioned, production, manufacturing in many places became more factory-based, became more automated. So manufacturing was not so dominated by home-based manufacturing or small-scale manufacturing anymore. There were more automation, automated production, more factory-based production. And if you have more automated production, you have more factory-based production, certainly you will have larger and faster demand for resources because you produce faster. So you need to have your resources, more materials faster to keep in pace with the production. You also have larger and faster need for markets and customers. You have the pressure to keep finding new customers. Because now you're not just sewing one or two pieces of clothes, you're having one whole factory line of clothes coming out 24 hours and 18 hours a day. So you need to find enough customers to buy your things, otherwise your stock will be idle and unsold in your warehouse. Certainly with this change, manufacturing became more capital intensive, meaning that you need more money, you need more capital. You need money to buy equipment, money to buy supplies, money to hire manpower. You need money to lay the factory lines, the production lines. You need money to create a variety of products, etc. Along with this, companies, businesses would have more and wider infrastructure requirements. Because now people produce more things, people sell more things, people buy more things. They would want better and further infrastructure, especially in transportation, in communication, in utilities, etc. electricity. It says here that Singapore was facing a diminishing presence in sunset spice trade. So at that time, Singapore was facing less growth from spice, less gain from spice. Why? There are some reasons mentioned here. There are also some mentioned in the textbook as well. So in the past, one of the key users of spices would be food preservation. But as technology advanced, you would have the invention of other methods for preservation, such as refrigeration. When you have refrigeration, you can have the food shelf life lengthened by a lot. So there will be less demand for spices. At the same time, the Spice Islands and around, they developed more capability to do trade directly with the buyers and sellers. So they bypass Singapore, the middleman. I've said before that to be a middleman is a very stressful job.
I cannot see
If
already.
you are not good enough, you are not relevant enough, people can discard the middleman very easily. So as a middleman, you must always charge not too high cost. As a middleman, you must always find new value add. As a middleman, you always have to diversify your customer base, diversify your services. So at this point of time, you'll see Spice Islands using less of Singapore as a middleman because they can do transactions more directly. You will see this pattern coming again and again. The pattern whereby Singapore became quite successful and wealthy due to a role as a middleman. Then later on, this middleman role was bypassed or turned obsolete, and then Singapore had to go over and over again to find new ways to regenerate growth. In case for some of you who may not know what the Malay Peninsula refers to, so this would be the Malay Peninsula. So this is Singapore. So this long narrow land, what we know as West Malaysia now, would be the Malay Peninsula at the past. In the previous lessons, we have highlighted certain factors that catalyze or promoted growth of Singapore in the early years, like those mentioned over here. And subsequently, there are also more changes around the world that promoted this development.
History.
This would just be a
Social
reiteration.
studies.
This last point on action expecting to the Malay states will be talked about.
Not really now, but
So now we move on to talk about how the team boom in the world has helped to promote development of Singapore. So due to the industrial revolution, there was a boom in global demand for tea. In other words, many people would want to buy tea and use tea for many purposes, such as those mentioned over here. If this is the case, then the high global demand for tea will bring a lot of business opportunities. But these opportunities will mean nothing to Singapore if Singapore cannot get involved with it. Then how can Singapore get involved with it? Singapore was very lucky. Her immediate neighbor,
not the roundabout lah, but
had a lot of tea.
near.
So
Always at the park there.
Malay Peninsula
The
was
roundabout
rich
far
with
lah,
tea.
up there and like a bit.
The tea
Kekok
mining
the.
states were these 24 states. Collectively,
I
these
park
4
there
states were
planted. Huh?
known as Federated Malay States. Malaya became the largest tea producer by 1880s. So you can imagine how much tea was produced by Malaya and how much Singapore can benefit from it. Because the tea produced by Malaya can be transported to Singapore for processing, for trade, and then Singapore can ride on it and join in the scheme of value chain. Tea mining was labor intensive, you need a lot of workers, so you have a lot of migrant workers coming from other places of the world to work in tea mines, to dig tea. A lot of these migrants come from China due to reasons mentioned over here. For example, many of them had related work experience from China, so they can get a hang of the job more easily. Many of the Chinese are also more receptive towards wage employment. In other words, they are more willing to work for a boss in exchange of salary. Yeah. So the many local natives in this region at that time were more free-spirited, were more self-employed. So if you want to get more salaried workers, wage-paid workers, then you have to get more from elsewhere. We have also mentioned about how more ports in China will open up and more migration rules were relaxed in China after Opium War, which allowed the Chinese to come over to everywhere of the world, including this region. The Chinese from China came from various places, so they come from different dialect groups. Naturally, they would have conflicts because they are from different dialect groups, they have different cliques, they speak different languages, they have different cultures. And then within the Malay states alone, there would also be conflicts between the Malay rulers. Because last time the Malay Peninsula Peninsula was not Malaysia yet. It was made up of many different states, like many mini kingdoms. So each state was like a mini kingdom with its own ruler. Hence, of course, we may have some disputes and conflicts between the rulers from now from time to time, especially when everyone wants a share of the pie in the
Just started.
trade. So sometimes they may quarrel about who can collect fees or who can collect taxes when goods travel through a certain river or certain way. It crosses me and crosses you, so should you pay, should you get a cut or should I get a cut?
Lesson
So they may
4.
quarrel here and there. So there are people quarreling among the migrants, there are people quarreling among the rulers. In this case, the Malay rulers actually asked the British to come in to intervene and resolve the conflicts, to help mediate the conflicts. The British actually was not that interested to rule Malay Peninsula at that time. And the British actually tried to keep a distance from the local politics of all these states because they are
I need to check.
quite complex and you do not want to get yourself involved. Remember, money is the priority. Things that do not help me to get more money, I will not want to get involved from the perspective of the British. The British interest would be, as we said before, to get nice ports, nice trading routes in this region, to prevent nice ports, nice trading routes from being controlled by competitors, wanting to get nice resources like tin or rubber from this region, etc. So as long as this interest can be secured, then the British did not want to get too involved in politics in this peninsula. Then, but there was certain worry about what would happen if the British did not intervene, because the rulers asked British for help, and the British was thinking that if I do not help, they may ask someone else to help instead. If they ask Holland or other empires to help instead, then it would mean that Holland or other empires may penetrate into this region more, exert more influence, and then threaten British interests. So with that in mind, the British agreed to help out and intervene and help to resolve the conflicts. Some of you may ask me, why did the Malay rulers ask British to help? I think there are some possible reasons that we cannot be sure. For example, perhaps the Malay rulers saw the advantages of British administration in the Straits Settlements. So they have some confidence and trust on how the British can intervene. And also during that time, if you recall from lesson 2, British was having dominance along the Straits of Malacca. So they have more dominance, more influence, more control. So maybe this is also one reason why British was chosen. And so the British Empire stationed some officers in the tin mining districts, and the British Empire made use of an essence of indirect control, indirectly on these places. So it says that Malay rulers have to accept advice in all matters except for blah 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 blah. This is something familiar when we look at indirect control when we talk about India as well. Immigrants were in effect under British rule. So effectively the immigrants were under the management of the British. Frankly speaking, without the presence of the immigrants, the British would have less legitimate excuse or pretext to enter Malay Peninsula and exert influence in Malay Peninsula, because they want, the Malay rulers want British to help in settling and managing the immigrants. So this is like one reason, one excuse that British can use to come into this place and exert more control. Then you may also ask why this one would, why the Malay rulers would be willing to let the British to have certain share of power and share of control. I think this would really up to individual analysis, but although when you have indirect control by the British, although you have more influence by the British the rulers would have less power. But the rulers are still the rulers in name. They are still the ruler of Perak, ruler of Selangor, ruler of Bugis and Bilang, etc. And the rulers managed to get economic growth and modern development out of British presence. So there will be benefits. Besides, the Malay rulers may not be so keen and interested to handle these foreign migrants from elsewhere. So if you push this job to the British, it may be something that they are quite okay with it. Just now, if you look at the map, the four mining states were quite nearby to each other, they are next to each other. So it is possible to manage them together with some coordination. So the British did try to have some common infrastructure and facilities like railway, ports, medical facilities for these few states to share. In case you get confused after reading the textbook and other literature, like who is under who, what is under what, I tried to sort it out with some simple diagram. So at that particular time, Strait settlements, which covered these two places, would be under the direct jurisdiction and legal rule of Britain. British control over the federated Malay states would be quite indirect. British control over the unfederated Malay states would be even more indirect, would be even lower. Why? Because these four states are tin producing, so they give nice good resources. Therefore, the British would want to have more control and influence over them to get good things from them. At that point of time, unfederated Malay states were not tin producing, so they were not producing resources attractive or lucrative to the British yet. So if the British did not get much benefit from them, the British did not want to engage them too deeply as well. So this one will be direct control, indirect control, a very, very indirect control, very, very low influence, etc. The boss for the Strait settlements was also the boss for the federated Malay states from the British perspective. And then the unfederated Malay states also liaise with this same guy. So essentially you got one guy, one person as the main boss overseeing the whole region here. Singapore was the center of Strait settlements. Later on it became the gateway for the entire Malay Peninsula. So it's like the entry point, exit point for many states. So the tin and rubber and good things produced by Malay Peninsula can be transported to Singapore and then transported to the world. Then other resources or other manpower from the world can go to Singapore and then transported to whatever places required in the Malay Peninsula. To recap this topic of indirect rule, the British did not really mind to be the indirect manipulator behind the scenes, rather than the outright ruler at the front. As long as the British can get what it wants. If I can get the money I want, if I can obtain and achieve my objectives, it's okay that I do not have high profile, I do not have the fanciful appearance. Besides, if need be, the indirect rule can grow and expand into direct rule, as what we have seen in the Strait settlements. Now we will talk a bit about how much infrastructure has grown during that period of time, how infrastructure has been created to facilitate the transportation of goods and people, etc., between Malay Peninsula and Singapore. So it was the start of railways being created in the Malay Peninsula. At that time, there was no causeway yet at Woodlands. So the railway can only reach up till Johor, and then if you want to transport things between Johor and Singapore, you will go through Malacca. pictures later on in other slides, they will show that the roads and railways in the Malay Peninsula will somehow lead towards Singapore in the end. So with that happening, it makes Singapore look like a land transport hub, not just a sea transport hub of the past. And many of these railways and roads would form today. Many of this infrastructure would still be applicable today, such as the railway, although there will be more modification and improvement nowadays. So this is just a depiction of how the railway has developed. So in the early days, right, the railway will be very short to link between the port and the tin mining towns. So you want to transport the tin from the tin mining towns to the port, and then a lot of the transportation between the ports and Singapore will be through water, via water. Then as day goes by, years goes by, we have improvement and increase in the transport network via rail. So you will have the Malay Peninsula tin mining state leading all the way to Johor. As I said just now, no causeway yet. So if you want to transport things between Johor Bahru and Singapore, it will must be via water. Later on, then you have the causeway. And now we talk a bit about smelters. So having smelters in Singapore help to strengthen the role of Singapore and the value of Singapore in tin-related businesses. If you know when you dig tin from the ground, it will be the raw, impure form of tin. So you will need smelters to process and refine the tin into purer tin, a cleaner tin. So Singapore had smelters at that time for this purpose. As mentioned before, processing is a way of value add. So if Singapore can help people to do value add, I value add on your tin products such that you can get refined tin from raw tin, and then this refined tin can be sold at higher prices. It is like a value add given by Singapore as a movement. As years go by, Singapore cannot be just a simple on-trade port trade town or city, whereby you import something from elsewhere and then you pass parcels and re-transport, re-export to the other places. Passing parcel is a very uncomplicated job. Yeah, it can be removed very easily, it can be obsolete very easily. So you need to do something more besides importing a tin and then pass this tin to someone else. So you try to process this tin to something that's more lucrative. By doing that, it will be adding value to and adding profits to the businessman. It will be adding value to the economic activities in Singapore. Singapore's smelter was very competitive and popular among global clients, not just those for Malay Peninsula. They were more competitive and popular due to their higher quality and efficiency in processing. The smelters also have ready coal supply from bunkering stations. So we will see that Singapore was the coal depots for steamships. Remember, we said that Singapore was the coal depot to provide coal to steamships as fuel for the ships to run. This coal can be used as fuel to melt the tin and refine tin as well. So you got this consistent ready supply of fuel to burn and melt the tin and then to do refinery. As compared to smelters in Malaya, they use charcoal, and the charcoal supplies were depleting, so they will be less competitive as compared to Singapore. Because charcoal is from the ground. Once they dig from the dig and gone, they will have less of it. You need time to find replacement. But Singapore being a coal depot will have ready supply transported to Singapore day in, day out. Then the smelters were very close to the port. The smelters will be very close to the central district where the banks were. So if the smelters were close to the port, then then it will be very convenient for the tin to be transported from the smelter to the port and then to elsewhere. If it's very near to the business district, then if the businessman needed to take a loan or other banking services while doing this businesses, then it will be convenient as well. It says here that the smelter benefited from the tin market in Singapore. The smelters also contributed to the tin market in Singapore. What does it mean? It's trying to say that this smelter, tin smelter and tin market will have a symbiotic relationship. So some people, some businessmen, they like to trade tin in Singapore. So they also refine tin in Singapore out of convenience. Since I'm here, I like the tin marketplace. I'm here already do trading, right? Me as well, I use the smelter here. So if this is the case, the smelter benefited from the tin market. The opposite also applies. So some people, they like to use the smelter. They think that the quality is good, the service is good. Then they feel that since I'm using the smelter in Singapore, me as well, I do trading in Singapore for the tin as well. So you may, I don't go either way, but they benefit from each other. At that time, the smelters were owned by Europeans. Yeah. So the Europeans may buy raw tin and then sell refined tin, or they may provide refining services for other people. It really depends on what happened just now or in the past. This slide is just trying to tell you that you need a lot of money to do this business. Yeah. Be it in tin trade, be it in tin mining, be it in tin smelting. So you need a lot of money for various bills to pay, like those mentioned here. And there were banks present in Singapore to support such financing. When people need to borrow money, they need to take up loans, either loans from the bank or loans from other people. You need to have proper contract. Now you have gone the days whereby business transactions have become very much more developed. When you want to borrow money, it's not just you write on a very scrumpy piece of paper, like I swear with my blood that I will lend you the money or whatever, right? You really need proper contracts in order to protect both the borrower and the lender. And with the legal framework from the British, it allows this type of contracts to be enforced better, to be facilitated better. Tin mining business and related business will be very high in capital requirement. You need a lot of money, especially towards the later part of the era. You need to bring in really more complicated machineries to dig the random tin from the deep ground. All this require money. It is not sufficient to just rely on funds from one individual or two partners. So if you want to get money, it's not just from your own pocket or your own inheritance, or you get a few people to collaborate with you as shareholders and join in. You need much more money than that. So because of this, many of the companies involved in tin mining and tin trade, they also try to raise money by selling company shares on stock exchange, like how we buy and sell shares in modern days. But of course, at that time, Singapore was not so mature yet to have a Singapore stock exchange. Therefore, these companies would sell their shares, would have their IPO in London Stock Exchange. So this is like another way for companies in Singapore and Malay Peninsula to get financing from global sources, not just somewhere nearby, but really far away, as shown here. When you see the word floated, you can just take it as selling shares, selling company shares on stock market. Okay, now this textbook mentioned this companies called agency houses. So I will elaborate a bit on this part here. Agency houses in Singapore at that time were very important because they provide professional business expertise needed for the development of Singapore. Agency houses are like companies providing agent services. So they act as agent for all sorts of things. Agent to run business, agent to buy things, agent to sell things. They are agents. Many of these managers from agency houses used to be EIC traders, EIC officers in the spice trade days. Then with their past experience, networks and reputation, they switch career and they join the agency houses, or they create their own agency houses to provide services to other people. One of the services they may provide would be to help owners of tin mines and rubber estates to run their operations. So you can think a bit like how town council works. So town council, the government, the political party, they engage outsiders as agents to run the estate maintenance, something like that. So the owners of tin mines, owners of rubber estates, they may not be able to handle all the operations themselves, or they may not want to handle the operations themselves. So they got these professional guys as agents to help them operate. This group of people became very important, not just about how they manage the tin mines and rubber estates, but also how they help to raise money from those stock exchange. Just now we said that one way to raise funds from for these companies would be to sell shares via the London Stock Exchange. The reputation and trust of these managers and or professionals were important consideration to get investor support to buy those shares. Because many of the people who buy those shares will be Europeans far away in Europe, in Britain or elsewhere. So the Europeans are more willing to buy shares from this unknown company located at a far place that they have not visited before, because of the reputation of these professionals. The European investors would know these people since their spice trade days in EIC. So they know that, oh, I know your track record in doing business. So if you have been doing business quite well with the EIC and related agencies, I guess that you can also do quite a good job in managing these tin mines and rubber estates. So I dare to buy shares of these companies because I trust these agency houses more than I trust the bosses of the tin mines and real rubber estates. So the reputation of these agents help to increase further confidence in investors to buy shares. That's what it's trying to say here. These professionals also went to many other services, so they provided all kinds of services. They do not just provide services to run the tin mines and rubber estates. They do not just provide supplies to the tin mines and rubber estates. They do not just help to provide import and export transactions for these commodities. They do even more. They also provide other services like shipping, insurance, banking, marketing, blah, blah, blah. So they are multi-purpose. I may help this tin mine to run the tin mine. I may also find manpower or supplies to support the tin mines. I may help these tin mines to buy and sell their tin. Then I also give you a whole package of service, like I help you to market your product, I help to find insurance for your product, how to ship and all those things. This would be very important for Singapore up till today, because develop new sectors, new business areas that Singapore was not involved in the past. And because of all these new sectors, new business area created, Singapore would not be just a simple port or just a simple trading center. Singapore will do many more things, involved in many more things. So with this introduction and exploration of other services, it allowed Singapore to get involved in more complex activities, to take up more kinds of roles, to become more related or entrenched in the value chain, to be more involved in different things, etc. As for human resource, so the people present wherever they come from also help Singapore to develop further at the time. Because tin mining, as I said just now, was labor intensive. Later on, rubber cultivation also very labor intensive. You need a lot of human beings to work in the Malay Peninsula, in the tin mines in Malay Peninsula, in the rubber fields, rubber estates in the Malay Peninsula. So Singapore was the entry point for many workers who wanted to work in the Malay Peninsula. So this is like the entry point, the main point of this embarkment. If you want to work in Malay Peninsula, maybe you will use the port in Singapore to land, and then you will travel further upwards. So there will be a lot of human flow in and out of Singapore at that time. Then Singapore was also having a need for manpower, to support tin businesses, to run port operations, to develop those peripheral services that we mentioned just now. So Singapore had her fair share of need for manpower as well. Yeah, as mentioned over here. Humans were the most important resource for Singapore at that time, and perhaps at this moment as well, especially the stayers, because many of the people who work in Singapore and the Malay Peninsula eventually decided to stay on and settle down in Singapore. And because of that, they helped to develop the place in Singapore. They helped to build up the population in Singapore. So it is the catalyst for long-term economic development and population growth. I mentioned something before in lesson 2. We will see this again in lesson 11. Because of this influx of people during the tin and rubber booms, Singapore experienced a very big increase in population, much more than what you see in the early years. Because in the early years, Singapore was more involved in on-trade trade, more involved in handling spices. There would not be a high need for a lot of human beings, a lot of workers. Because when you're just doing trading, right, entry port trade is, I take things from this place and then I pass to another place. This is more of buying and selling. This is not admin-based kind of work. It's not production-based of work. It's not labor-based of work. Yeah. You don't need a lot. You just need an officer sitting in the office to paperwork, right? It's a paperwork kind of work. Yeah, but now you go into many things like processing the tea. You want to carry this thing, create this thing. You need more human beings, you need more sweat and blood. And you also need more brains, more expertise. So laborers become very important for Singapore. Business bosses also become very important for Singapore. And hence you need much more people. And during the time of tin and rubber booms, the amount of businesses will be much more than the early days where you see spice trade. So obviously when you have much more activity, you will need much more people for whatever purpose. So this is just a recap to summarize the key roles of Singapore in this tin boom period. As usual, Singapore will always be a prominent port involved in the transportation, storage, and logistics of goods. In this case, the goods will be more related to tin. Then Singapore will act as a market to buy and sell tin. Singapore also starts to provide more and more services to whatever businesses and people require. So here are some services mentioned. Singapore became a market for tin trade teen trade and later on rubber trade. So let's say for teen trade, the textbook mentioned that you have customers as far as people coming from Australia, Africa, and even America. So from then onwards, Singapore really became a global market. Last time, although Singapore worked a lot with foreign people, foreign businessmen, they may be more nearby. From this boom onwards, Singapore really stretched our wings to reach out to the world. You can really call yourself a global market or a global hub, so to speak. That will be the start of Singapore moving more towards the global arena. This point we already mentioned about the value of smelting in tin trade. So the point here says that Singapore was also given authority to set grades for tin. So what does this set grades mean? So having authority to set grades for tin is something like how a place or organization is allowed to certify gold as 999 gold, 916 gold. Yeah. So Singapore was allowed to do the similar thing for tin. So Singapore is given the authority to set this batch of tin as grade 1, and then that batch of tin as grade 1. Yeah. Of course, I'm not very sure what is their grading system, but if you imagine your 999 gold, 916 gold, that is 24K gold, that kind of thing. Yeah. They have the certification, right? Yeah. And when you have this authority to set grades, it shows that Singapore is a market forerunner. It's a credible benchmark. It means that the capability of Singapore was tested. Because Singapore will have to confirm that, okay, this is the purity, this is the quality of that batch of tin, that ingot of tin, that lump of tin. You have the capability to do this determination, ascertaination. The integrity of Singapore was also trusted, because Singapore must have the honesty to say that this lump of tin is weighing how many grams, how many kg. This lump of tin is how many percentage purity, etc. I say you must believe me, because the whole batch will be transported here, and then the businessman will not have the time and ability to check one by one. I say it's like that, you believe I say that. I say that this is 999 gold, you believe that this is 999. So it's not just about the capability of Singapore, it's also the integrity and honesty of Singapore. And with that, you will have Singapore having even much more positive reputation. More people will be willing to work in Singapore, trade in Singapore, because Singapore has this reputation of capability and trust. During that time, we also have Singapore having more advancement in communications and especially in telecommunication. This will be convenient because if you are a global market, you are having global business, you want to be able to have people from different parts of the world to communicate with each other, and such advancements would help people to communicate across the globe. Okay, so this is just some numbers to show how much tin trade has grown over the years. Then, what is the impact of tin boom on Singapore? It created a change in trade orientation. So in the early days, Singapore will be more focused on spice trade. So this is the time where Singapore changed to move more towards tin trade. And this was good for Singapore because, as we mentioned just now, that was the time whereby Singapore was not doing that well in spice trades anymore. Singapore was not getting a lot of gain from spice trade anymore. So before Singapore went down, she was lucky to have tin trade coming up to prop her up to the next leap of prosperity. Which this is the point is mentioned here as well. There was a switch from hinterland, so you switch from Spice Islands to more towards the Malay Peninsula. You have a trend of immigration of large quantity of human resources from other parts of the world, especially China. So that was the time whereby Singapore has a big increase in change in population composition. So from then onwards, we start to have Chinese evolving towards becoming the majority of the population. We'll talk more about this in the future. Then Singapore expanded her role in the global stage and became a global teen exporter in the global teen market. It provided the impetus to become a global financial and commercial center. So impetus is something like all these developments, especially the peripheral services provided by the agency houses, had provided the momentum, the stimulus for Singapore to kickstart her first step to become a global financial center, global commercial center, not just a port center, not just a trading center. All those peripheral services of high economic value will start to grow with time and propel Singapore to become the global financial center and commercial center of what we have seen today. Nowadays, financial services and commercial services play a very big part in the economy of Singapore. It occupies a big part of GDP, not the port part and the trading part. Okay, now we shall talk about how rubber boom would promote the growth and development or participate in the growth and development of Singapore at that time. I have purposely organized this section to look like the previous section for tea, so that you can just do a direct compare and contrast when you want to digest the two sections together. So I will go through quite fast because many parts for this section will be relevant or repeated in the previous part on tea already. So when rubber boom came, the story was the same. You have a global demand for rubber due to the important users of rubber, such as those mentioned here. Then Singapore could only benefit from this rubber boom if she can put herself inside these related businesses. And she was very lucky. She counted her lucky stars again because her immediate neighbor upstairs got a lot of rubber. So she can leverage on this to earn even more money. And in this case of rubber, the rubber plantations were spread across many states. So they were not just constrained to 4 key mining states like we have seen just now. Rubber can be planted everywhere as long as the physical environment allows that to happen. So you will not be constrained by terrains and areas. As a result, both federated Malay states and unfederated Malay states engage in rubber plantation. So if you look at the gray areas, they will be the key areas with rubber plantations. And hence it says here, rubber cultivation covered more places than tin mining. Tin mining, just now we said that the 4 states will be the main producers. For rubber, you have many places producing rubber. Besides that, tin is exhaustible, meaning that once the tin was depleted from your ground, you cannot dig for more tin and earn money from it. You only get so much, you only have so much. But rubber will be different. Rubber trees are living things. As long as you can maintain the rubber estates, as long as you can maintain the rubber trees, you can keep having continuous supply of rubber to sell and to earn money. So the amount of selling, the amount of profit to get will be more continuous, more lasting, and more in amount. So it says here that Malaya produced more than the rest than the world by 1919, which tells you how much rubber was produced by Malaya and how much Singapore can benefit from it. Then, because you have more places in the peninsula involved in rubber cultivation, then the British influence in Malay Peninsula will increase as well because they will have influence in more areas. And if British have more influence in more areas, it also said that Singapore as the key administrative, economic, military base of Britain at that time would have more importance in Malay Peninsula as well. Earlier on, we have said that the amount of influence Britain had on unfederated Malay states were very indirect, were very low, because unfederated Malay states were not producing the good tea needed for British to earn money. So last time, British was not so interested with them. But now it's different. Unfederated Malay states also produce rubber. They are also money stealers. So in the end, the British Empire would want influence and control over the whole of the Malay Peninsula, because now the whole of Malay Peninsula are money stealers. They are creating nice resources to earn money.
Malaysia is federated.
And hence it cemented the process of the whole peninsula to be under British rule. It also marked the start whereby the different Malay states were increasingly being viewed and managed as one entity. Because in the past, they were different states having their own local rulers. But now you have the British coming in, having more influence over all of them, having control over more of them. So all the Malay states are now being viewed as one whole thing, one whole entity, not simply separate kingdoms by themselves. So this would be the precursor to the federated country later on. Because later on, all the different states will come together to form one country called the Federation of Malaya, then later on called Malaysia. It was the time of birth of deep connections between Singapore and Malay Peninsula. This was the time whereby you can really say that Singapore and Malay Peninsula would be having really deep links between one another, because Malay Peninsula was a key hinterland for Singapore. Singapore relied a lot on this peninsula. And also Britain or the British Empire often managed the two together. So they will be having more similar way of doing things and more relationships, so on and so forth. When we say deep connections or deep links, the connections or links can be in terms of activity, system, infrastructure, lifestyle, culture, or human bonds. Many of these links would still have impact being felt today and in the future. So you can look back whether you can think of any examples to this point. Like, can you think of any long-lasting thing that links Singapore and Malaysia together up till today? Yeah, like how their infrastructure works, how their system works, how our culture, how our lifestyle works, how the bonds work. We have a lot of relatives and friends between both ends of the causeway, etc. So you may want to think further, because this will be significant.
Why you need to think further?
Then infrastructure growth. Last time you said that railway was constructed for team trade, team boom. Then the existing railway can be used and recycled for utilization by the rubber boom as well. You can use this one. So it saved time and effort in railway construction, because you can use the existing railway and then you tap on it, you can improve and expand on it. So it will be more effective and efficient. Then when certain inner areas had rough terrains that railways cannot go in, then roads will be created to link and complement the railway. In 1923, this would be the time where the causeway was being built. So it will even facilitate the transport between Malay Peninsula and Singapore even more. So with this railway being created along the causeway, you can really have goods from the Malay Peninsula being transported all the way to the ports in Singapore at Tanjong Pagar, at Keppel, right? All the way, one straight road, without stopping. So this would be some diagrams to show. So this is the map in the olden days, just before rubber boom. Then this one I think is somewhere in the middle of the peak of rubber boom. So you can see that last time no causeway, now you have causeway. Then they can have a railway going from Malaya, Venezuela, on the way down, travel to the ports here, and then you can use the ports to transport the goods to other parts of the world. Then we can also see that the roads in the southern part of Singapore became much more extensive in network, because this will be a central business district to reflect the economic activity found at that time. Singapore created the Harbour Board in 1930 and further enhanced her port facilities. It says here that the port facilities were modernized before the peak of the demand. So if you have the foresight to modernize facilities before the peak of the rubber boom, Singapore became really well prepared to handle the big rise in port activities when the rubber boom. If the government or the stakeholders only started to modernize the port facilities when the rubber boom has happened or was happening, then it will be too late because it will take time to do construction. By the time everything was done, you may lose quite a lot of business opportunities. So you need to have the foresight to know when to create in advance. This part would be similar to what I've said about processing as a value add. So for tin, you have smelter to refine tin, to process tin as value add. In the case of rubber, you have mangles to process rubber latex. I won't say refine, to modify rubber latex in a way that can help people to have further shipping and manufacturing. If you know, the raw rubber latex that they tap from the trees have very short shelf life. So there's a need to process the rubber into certain rubber sheets or certain rubber form so that this rubber can be transported to other places. This rubber can be used for manufacturing in other places. So this is like providing value add to businessmen. Then we talk about agency houses as well. The role, the value of agency houses in the rubber days would be similar to the tin days. Yeah, so many points here would be applicable, would be represented. But I would say that the value of the agency houses in attracting investor support to buy shares would be even more important for the case of rubber as compared to the case of tin. Because rubber cultivation, rubber process would require a lot of money. But at the same time, rubber cultivation would take more cost, more risk, and more time before you can see returns as compared to tin. Because it's more expensive to set up businesses for this one. You need to spend money to buy land, to clear the land. You need to plant the trees. You need to hire a lot of workers to do all these things. It involves more cost. It takes more time for investors to see profit. For rubber trees, you need years for rubber to grow and mature before you can get the latex. So the investors must be daring and willing to wait for a few years before they can see profit. And the reputation of the agency houses will provide this confidence to them. And it will be more risky to do rubber estates as well, because anytime you got one pest attack or infection attack, your whole tree estates may be gone or killed. So there will be more risk involved, more time involved, more cost involved, which means that it will be more challenging to ask for investment from the stock market. Then it will be more important that the agency houses look more credible, so that it's easier for the companies to sell their shares on the stock market. Yeah. Then I think this part on peripheral services is mentioned just now already, so it's similar. By the time you reach the rubber boom days, these peripheral services have become more established, become more mature. So Singapore has become even more ingrained and faced into becoming the global financial center, global commercial centers. This one we have mentioned just now. So if with more of different kinds of services being provided, there will be more new sectors, more business areas being created. So these sectors will be the one really creating the wealth and economic growth to Singapore economy today. As mentioned just now, financial business services would be the key propeller, key pillar of Singapore economy today. Then the part of human resource, the need for human resource will be applicable in rubber boom days as well. But in rubber boom days, you need even more people. So the same logic will apply. What we have said for tin will apply for rubber, but you need even more people for the case of rubber, because the labor-intensive nature would be even more obvious and prominent. So this would be similar to what we have seen just now. So you can try to compare and contrast between what we have said for tin. Are there similarities? Are there differences? Singapore was also given the authority to set rates for rubber. So this will be quite repetitive. I think the last point will be something that you want to take note. It says that setup of rubber market followed after setup of tin market. So Singapore was fortunate. Singapore was having the tin market set up first. So the tin markets provided the experience, the environment, the infrastructure that can be reused and improvised when it comes to the setup of rubber market. So you can like learn good lessons and bad lessons from this, and then you can create your rubber market more effectively. This is just trying to say that Singapore obtained rubber not just from Malay Peninsula, but also from other parts of the world, especially the Dutch East Indies, which will cover what we know as Indonesia today. Yeah. As you can imagine, Holland would not be that happy to have rubber from Dutch East Indies to be traded in Singapore, if you remember the concept of mercantilism. However, the businessmen will still want to try their luck because of the better facilities and opportunities in Singapore. So these are just some data for this slide and the next slide. You can see that initially the Malay Peninsula would provide more of the rubber imports, and later on Dutch East Indies would overtake it. Then this would show that rubber exports would be a dominant commodity as compared to the others. Impact of rubber boom on Singapore, so we have further growth, we have further trade expansion. The Singapore economy can grow even faster, can grow even more by riding on the momentum from tin trade, by riding on the experience, the infrastructure, the strategies used from tin trade. Yeah, so the others will be quite similar. You have more people coming in. Now you have a another role as a global exporter and market for rubber. And this is the time whereby Singapore became more mature as a global financial and commercial center. Just now we said that tin trade was like the starting point of Singapore moving towards this. Now Singapore has become more mature in this aspect, then more infrastructure development, modernization. Now we should say something about oil. So oil also provided this stimulus for growth in Singapore. It will be quite fast because there's only one slide. Towards after World War I, Dutch East Indies and British Borneo became oil producers. So if you're interested, Dutch East Indies is somewhere here, as shown by the map here. Then British Borneo is somewhere here, the pink part. Yeah. So when they became oil producers, they produced oil, they provided oil, which would be valuable resources for Singapore's economic growth. So Singapore added these places as part of the list of hinterlands. So last time, Singapore relied more on the islands for spices. Later on, Singapore relied more on Malay Peninsula for tin and rubber. Then now, Singapore also rely more on oil from the islands again. Yeah, so that's why it's called a relink. Yeah, like how the link is like how spices would be useful to Singapore in the past. Yeah. Earlier on, we said that in tin boom and rubber booms, Singapore diversified her roles in the value chain and provided a lot of products and services. But for a case of oil at that time, Singapore's role will be narrower. Singapore will be getting economic growth through more specialized functions like handling of oil, storing of oil, bunkering of oil, repairing of oil ships, etc. So with this catalyst, Singapore saw growth in ship repair. You also have international rich companies, your oil MNCs being attracted to Singapore due to Singapore's geographical location and the light business routes. So if I recall, Shell, the oil company, came to Singapore in 1891, yeah, all the way until today. Then as time goes by, Singapore has evolved into a global oil and gas hub today. Today, Singapore's growth would be very wide-ranging, not very narrow. Last time narrow, now very wide-ranging. So a lot of upstream, downstream, midstream roles being handled, as mentioned over here. Yeah. Interestingly, Singapore is one of the world leaders in constructing oil rigs, even though Singapore has no oil. Many companies like to work with Singapore or come to Singapore for oil and gas businesses because they can get the whole package of things done at one place. Singapore is like a one-stop shop. You can do all these things at one place. So you can transport the fuel to Singapore, then you can blend and refine the fuel in Singapore, then you can trade the oil in Singapore, then you can store the oil in Singapore, then you can do all sorts of things, right? And then you can further transport and sell this oil elsewhere. So it's like a one whole package given. People like the convenience, people like the integration. With that, oil and gas and related sectors would be a key pillar to Singapore today. So you will realize that if oil prices are not good, Singapore trade and economy will not be good. If oil services, oil products are not in demand, Singapore trade, Singapore performance will not be good. So how good Singapore will be in economic sense ties a lot with oil. So when oil prices are good, Singapore will perform better. When oil companies, oil and gas sector is in higher demand, Singapore will do better. So here are some numbers. Then lastly, as you know, nowadays people are calling for more attention towards climate change. People are calling for the reduction in use of fossil fuels. People are calling for the use of more cleaner energy. Therefore, if Singapore continues her traditional industry model and success formula, she will get obsolete very quickly. She will get business loss very quickly if people stop using oil and gas in the next 10 years or 20 years. Therefore, in preparation of this new trend, the government tries to reposition Singapore as the global energy hub, not global oil and gas hub. Singapore tries to transform Singapore as somewhere that you can handle all kinds of energy, including clean energy, not just oil and gas. So now you can see that they are exploring carbon trading, hydrogen hub, biofuels, etc. Okay, so this will mark the end for the first part. For the first part, I will suggest that you try to do comparison between the different booms so that you know what promoted the progress of Singapore during the different booms, and then what are the similarity and the differences, etc. Okay, with that, I think we shall take a few minutes break. We'll come back around 7:55, 5 minutes.
I still have more to go. Betul eh? Stretch lah. Enjoy. I play game first. Oh, you wanna stretch lah? Alright, so you can have someone if you want.
I will later. I was falling asleep. I saw you.
What long sleep? No, very long day.
I want to eat. My hand no food. Huh? I want to eat but no food.
Hey, come, we buy food. We buy food. Where? There got the vending machine lah.
Vending machine?
One hour.
Vending machine? Got vending machine? Oh, the other side eh?
27 Feb,
I lazy pause this thing. Can I not pause?